I'd like to share a couple of Christmas stories with you tonight. So these are some kind of fun stories, so I hope we'll get into it a little bit. The first story is about my friend Steve, who grew up in a small town in Iowa. He tells the story of a Christmas a long time ago that he has never forgotten. You see, Steve lived with his mom and dad in a very simple house, pretty much in the heart of town. His mom was a stay-at-home mom, and he really appreciated that. She was always there for him when he left for school in the morning and when he returned home in the evening. Steve's dad was a carpenter. It was pretty steady work, but not always, and the winter was especially difficult due to the extreme weather they could have there in Iowa. It seemed like there was always just living on the edge for them, and they had pretty much everything they needed, but there never seemed to be enough for many of the luxuries of life. Christmas was only about a month away, and the town was beginning to look a lot like it. The various shop owners were decorating the stores for the season, and a beautiful white blanket of snow just covered the ground. On the way to school, Steve would pass through the town enjoying all the decorations and the window displays. As Christmas approached, Johnson's department store had been working on a window display that was of special interest to Steve. When it was finally completed, there it was, the most beautiful electric train set that Steve had ever seen. It was all set up to run through a little town and with houses and shops and even a little train station. There was a water tower very similar to the one in town, and there was a working semaphore and a railroad crossing that would come down. And then this little guy would pop out of this little shack, and then as soon as the train went by, he'd pop back into the shack. Every day when Steve walked to school, he would stop at Johnson's department store to gaze through the glass and watch the train as it traveled through the little town. Steve wondered if he could ever own such a wonderful train set. Well, maybe if he dropped some strong hints to his parents, they might consider getting it for him for Christmas. And that is exactly what he did. And Steve even took his parents to Johnson's department store to see the train set with all of its amazing features. Now, Steve knew deep down inside that his parents did not have the money to afford such an expensive gift for him. But Christmas is about hope, after all, and Steve hoped like he'd never hoped before. If he could get that train set for Christmas, he would never ask for anything ever again. It seemed like that was all Steve could think about. Well, Christmas was getting closer, and it was time for Steve to help his father put up the Christmas lights on the house. Steve's dad got out the lights and strung them across the yard to find that one bulb that caused the whole string to go out. Remember those kind of lights? Remember those? And when they found the culprit, they'd replace it, and the string would light up the whole front yard. Well, Steve's dad climbed up on the tall ladder, and he began attaching the lights at one end of the house. Now, it was Steve's job to feed the string to his dad while his dad was putting it up on the house. Well, while Steve was sort of lost in thought about the train set, the ladder began to rock back and forth, and pretty soon his father fell to the ground with a thud and started to groan in pain. And Steve rushed into the house, and he got his mom, who called the aid car, and as they were carrying his dad off to the hospital in the aid car, Steve said he was terribly embarrassed to admit that the first thing that entered his mind was, "There goes the electric train set." Steve's dad ended up with a broken leg, and that just ensured that Steve would probably not be getting the train set for Christmas. But still, his hope never went away. Christmas Eve came, and the family gathered around the tree to exchange gifts, and it was the usual modest gifts that were given. Steve received a rather small box that he carefully unwrapped, and in it was a fine pair of brand new red mittens, which he really needed. After all the gifts were exchanged, Steve asked if he could go outside and try out his new mittens. His real reason for going outside was not really to try out the new mittens. He figured they would work just fine. He really needed to get away from his mom and dad for a moment so they wouldn't see his disappointment. He just needed to be able to cry a little bit without anybody seeing him. Well, as Steve stood outside wearing his new red mittens, the snow was just beginning to fall and adding to the blanket already covering the ground, and it was beautiful. As he reflected on his disappointment, he could hear the old steam train off in the distance that always came through town. He heard the characteristic whistle and the bell and the chug, chug, chug of the train as it came closer to town. And when the train finally arrived at the little town station, he heard the release of steam, and he saw the semaphore light up and change flags, and then the railroad crossing came down to stop the non-existent traffic on that Christmas Eve. He looked up at the big water tower with the name of the town written across it. And as the snowflakes fell on his upturned face, Steve's disappointment subsided a bit. The thought of the train set in the window of Johnson's department store became a distant memory. As he thought about the electric train set, Steve figured he really didn't need a toy train set after all. You see, he realized that he was living right in the middle of the train set. You may or may not know that I have a collection of nativity scenes in my office here at church. Being a pastor, people give you things, religious things, and so I have a lot of crosses, and I have some nativity scenes. And I have them on my bookcase, and they're there year-round. I don't take them down. I just really like them. And they're from different parts of the world, and some are just kind of whimsical. I love them all. I actually have a nativity in a bottle. Yeah, like a ship in a bottle. This is a nativity in a bottle. And one of my favorites is a nativity scene made up entirely of different breeds of dogs. It's up there on the screen for you. Some people think that's a little sacrilegious, but I think it's great. I just absolutely love it. I have one made of terracotta and one made of ivory. And I have one that's it's a little tiny nativity in the half of a walnut shell. Because Martin Luther one time said John 3:16 was the gospel in a nutshell. And my wife made me this. It's a little Christmas tree ornament with a little tiny nativity inside a nutshell. That's one of my all-time favorites. Well, I tell you this about nativities because it was appropriate that many, many years ago I received a unique phone call. The person on the phone had an unusual request for a Lutheran pastor. Just a little south of us, over here on Pacific Highway, there used to be a youth alcohol and drug treatment facility. And I was aware of it partly because one of the caregivers there used to bring some of the youth to worship with us on Sunday morning. They used to sit right up there in the balcony. It was really cool to have them here. Anyway, the person on the phone asked if I would come to the center and bless their nativity scene. Well, Lutheran pastors don't often get asked to bless much of anything, so I thought this was a good opportunity. Kind of a new thing. I thought it'd be kind of fun. So Father O'Neill went to the treatment center to bless their nativity scene. Have any of you ever seen a traditional Hispanic or Mexican nativity scene? They're really, really cool. Well, many of the caregivers and clients at the center were Hispanic, and so their Christmas decorations reflected their wonderful culture. The nativity I was asked to bless was all set up in the corner of the lobby, and it must have taken at least, I would guess, 3 4x8 sheets of plywood to set it on. Now, this is a kind of an example of a traditional Hispanic nativity scene, but this pales in comparison to the one I was to bless, okay? Just want you to know that. So in the middle was the traditional scene with Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus, the wise men, shepherds, and angel, and then various livestock were also there. But then all around the traditional scene was a vast array of figures and structures from just about every situation in life that you can think of. There were little Lego figures of all kinds, animals of every species ever created. There were little houses and wishing wells and plants and flowers and trees of every variety. There were a few troll dolls. You remember those little troll dolls with the fuzzy hair? There were some troll dolls scattered about. There was a few My Little Ponies around. There was a number of superhero action figures, and there was even a little Juan Valdez and his donkey from the old Colombian coffee commercials. Remember those? It was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. Now, just a little side note here. The treatment center also periodically invited celebrity types to visit and be with the clients for kind of fun and, some encouragement kind of thing. Well, this particular day, they had 3 Seagals present, okay? The Seahawks cheerleaders, right? So 3 of the Seahawks cheerleaders were there. So it came time for the official blessing to take place, and everybody took their places around the nativity scene, and I guess I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I was a little distracted by these 3 beautiful girls in their skimpy cheerleader uniforms, but I managed to get focused. And focus my attention to the task at hand, and Father O'Neill had a fine blessing of the nativity at the treatment center. As I looked at this wonderful nativity scene, which is a beautiful work of art, I thought, this is really the way it should be. Because you see, we all live right in the middle of the nativity scene. Who are you in the Christmas story? Are you Jesus, being a Christ to your neighbor, like Martin Luther suggested, being a little Christ to our neighbor? Are you maybe Mary and Joseph, giving all of your love to the baby Jesus? Are you one of the Magi, maybe wanting to know intellectually about this newborn king? Are you a shepherd who's heard angels and want to come and see this thing that has happened? Or are you like me, at times an ox or an ass? Or are you the innkeeper that has no room in the inn? If you think about it, we are probably all of the above at one time or another in our lives. But the joy of Christmas is knowing that Jesus was born for us all. We all live right in the middle of the nativity scene. The Christ child, you see, has been placed in our arms. Now the question is, what are we going to do with him the rest of the year? Amen.